This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. I'm joined all the way from just south of Glasgow by a fascinating gentleman called Zeb Robinson. How are you today, sir?
I'm pretty good.
Excellent, excellent.
Here I
Now,
am,
Zeb, you are
sunny day.
a sunny in Scotland. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness me.
yeah. So you have to celebrate.
So you are an artist and a filmmaker and quite a man of the world. And doing some research into this, I see you were born in Israel, grew up in Montreal. You were in
At
Toronto, you were
Toronto.
in New York, you were in, goodness me, Florence, Madrid. I'm probably missing out some places here. You went to Scotland. You were in London, Liverpool, and now you're back in Scotland. I probably missed out a few places, but you've been quite nomadic over the decades, have you not?
Yeah, just worked out that way.
Okay.
It wasn't planned. I didn't plan to go from this place to that place, but just one thing led to another, and then you know, here I
Wow.
am.
I've been looking at your website and doing a bit of study into your project, The Art and Politics of Eating. How did this project come about? What was your inspiration there?
So, as you said, I'm a painter and artist, and I also do make documentaries about food. I've been making documentaries about food since 2008. When I lived in a small village in Spain, surrounded by vineyards, and without thinking, I thought I'd do a small think, in depth. I just had this kind of light bulb moment.
Right.
I'll do a video tracing how the grapes got from there to the shelves of wine in a supermarket in London. And I'm always interested in the backstory of things because everything, and especially food, well, I don't know, especially, but food, since it's so, such a basic thing, has this very complex culture and history to it before it gets on our plate. Um, so I did that, and I didn't know what I was doing, and it was something of a mess, but people liked it. So and then later on, after I learned a bit, I re-edited it, and then I did another and a few, about three or four on wine. And then I started doing things on food because food is, you know, everybody's life. And visually, it's a lot more interesting. And there's different layers that one was very interesting, but, you know,
In looking at some of your more recent documentaries, I see you have some major concerns regarding the fragility of the food supply chains that we have throughout much of the Western world. And looking back at your film Arriba that you filmed in a small village just on the Spanish, almost on the Spanish border with Portugal, I was reading that in that small village, that people there were around 88% self-sufficient, which is the antithesis of how we are in the modern world today, for the most part.
yeah. So I came on to that by accident, and it was something that I hadn't seen before. People were, that most of their food, most of their supplies, and now it's, a bit more modern, but historically, it was even more so,
Wow.
because now they have cars. But I met one elderly couple that never had a tractor, never had a car, and they went everywhere with their donkey, you
Wow.
know, they had, or walking. I mean, walking with their donkey beside the donkey. So, and it was just a fascinating experience. People would kill a pig or two, a family every December, January when it was cold, and within an hour at most, that whole animal was food for that would be preserved for a year, sausages and other things. Um, and I went about six times uh, over the course of 2, 3 years to film various things. Um,
In that film,
what,
Ariba, you do have quite a graphic depiction of the slaughter of one of those pigs,
yeah.
and I found that kind of fascinating because it correlates with a number of thoughts that I've always had about how far people are removed from their food today. People are happy to purchase, this shrink wrapped stuff on the shelves of a supermarket, not really thinking about where it came from. How were the responses to the slaughter of that pig with your audiences around the world? Because some people are more comfortable with that kind of thing than others. I hunt, so I have no problem with the kind of taking apart, breaking down of animals and like whole animal butchery, because I've been looking into that for many a year now. But how were the audiences around the world with that particular scene?
So that's interesting. So by and large, everybody was okay. I didn't get
Yeah,
mobbed or,
cancelled,
I
right?
didn't get the same treatment that the big guys. um, and I, but a couple of times, because that is what people ate historically.
Yeah.
That's people's lives. It's self-sufficiency. It's an ecosystem. Someone in the documentary defined it self-sufficient ecosystem as where people live, their source of food, and their ability to recycle is all in close proximity. So anything else is not self-sufficient. So you could talk about, vegan fake meat and this, but that comes from far away and that costs, so once or twice there were some reactions. Once I showed it to tourism students in Valencia, and there was a few groans. I said, I don't know what you're groaning about, because your parents, at least your grandparents, would have
Yes.
done this thing.
Yeah.
So Arribas was was the way that all of Spain and all of Europe and all of North America and South America, all everybody lived like that up to 50, 100 years ago, different places. But, if you want to talk about conserving the planet, so nobody's going to go back and live like that. But there are lessons to be learned from that sort of um, lifestyle. What's interesting, though, by coincidence, I did another documentary called Life on the Douro, about the history of port wine. So in Rivas, in the Spanish side, you have the self-sufficient ecosystem, talking in terms of its environment and the way people live, but people left. The minute people get good job, I mean, that again happens all over the world. There's been a depopulation of rural life. They all go to cities, and that is causing grave problems. But in Portugal, where they made port wine, it isn't that system, but people stay on the land because they have this international trade, and it's a lot, it's thriving. The vineyards are live and they're just stunning. So you have, whereas in Rivas, it's just like a few, vineyards that people keep up because it's family heritage and a bit of extra money, but it's not a major
Yeah.
industry.
Very, very
So
few vineyards planted in that part of the world for sure. I think,
yeah,
and it's all native varieties, almost things that are a lot of them that are almost extinct now.
yeah.
Um, It was interesting. I was looking at the trailers for your films that you've made in Scotland, and I found all of that fascinating for personal reasons, obviously. What were your thoughts about the Scottish diet when you first arrived in Scotland? Because it's quite notorious for not being the healthiest of diets, shall we say?
Okay, so I did one called the Glasgow diet
Yes, I saw
actually,
that. Yeah.
and when I did that, I repeated this, but not everybody, but a lot of people, wanted to be a comedian and say, so what's that deep fried Mars bars? Or what's that,
Yeah, of
you know,
course. Yeah, I forget about
the famous iron brew, which is just chemicals and sugar, that Scotland's famous for, at least in the UK. So I said, no, actually, it's about the soups that people's grandmothers
it.
used to make. And what happened was, and we're talking someone, I interviewed some people in their 60s, maybe even younger, um, who talked about how soups were homemade with local butchers, with fish trucks or fish vans, sorry, that caught the fish that morning and would come around, and vegetables from small gardens that people had around their homes. So it was all fresh, it was all healthy. And then came the deindustrialization of Glasgow and
Yes.
the rest of the world too. And that's when the unhealthy diet really started to kick in.
Now, what year would
And
that be in Glasgow? Round about
well, in the 70s ish.
well, that's when the shipyards closed, right?
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't overnight, but,
Yeah.
coal mines, industry. So it's in Glasgow, but it's all over, and I don't want to simplify it because you
Oh,
have now ready meals that people can go in and instead of cooking, uh, they just pop it in a microwave and it's done, right? So it's a cultural thing. But what happens is then the culture takes over and people are kind of, hesitant to, they have an allergy against all green things that are green,
yeah.
right? So, and people talk about that, that they have the opportunity because there are local gardens. But if people have never had vegetables, then and they're more, people are comfortable with what they're comfortable with. So, um,
A lot
yeah,
of
so
a lot of
so
the
it's
stuff.
a real problem that it's a real problem. How do we reverse it when you have like fast food burgers uh, that are advertised for $1 a pound,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, versus and you can't really judge them because it's a day out. If someone doesn't have is paid minimum wage or and has 3 kids.
No, I understand. I think a lot of the points that you bring up in your documentaries and a lot of the things you covered have become incredibly poignant over the last little while because I think people have become much more aware of that fragility of the food supply chain over the last 3 years. First, the pandemic, then we've got the energy crisis in Europe, and the cost of living crisis in general. I mean, I saw some sort of return, even here in North America, to a certain degree of self-sufficiency when suddenly things became a little bit uncertain, and things weren't in the supermarket anymore. And during the pandemic, a lot of people took up to a lot into small gardens in in their backyards, vegetable gardens and the like. There was all that bread making that was going on, all of that stuff. I feel all of that's gone by the wayside now that people think that the pandemic is over. But in the UK, the supermarket shelves are in many places rather bare right now. And there are a multitude of reasons for that, one being the price of energy and the cost to grow all these things in greenhouses in the Netherlands. Then you've got that wonderful Brexit debacle going on. And then you've got the general cost of living crisis. And I think it's actually quite frightening to watch from afar and see something that looks like Soviet era Russia in the supermarkets when it comes to produce. What have your own experiences of this been? I mean, you're in Scotland, granted. Most of these pictures have been from down south in England.
Well, I go very early and buy whatever is necessary.
Right. Okay. So it's no big deal to you.
No, so I haven't really. I mean, you see the news, and I mean, it's just, there shouldn't be. There has been a, expansion of food banks.
Yes. Yeah.
There's just that's horrible. It's just humiliating. It's unnecessary.
And these
It's
are for
just,
people, the people using them, many of them actually have jobs as well.
yeah, they can't make, everybody should be, if you're working, you should have a living wage.
Yes. Yes.
There's no reason not to have a living wage. And the cost of it, the long-term cost, the hidden cost of health, of well-being, of so many other things, it costs a lot more than. And what happens too is then the taxpayers, basically, if a corporation isn't paying a worker enough for them to feed themselves, then taxpayers have to, make up
subsidizing
the rest. Yeah,
quite ridiculous.
So it's, I mean, I don't want my head to explode, but it's just and then you'll have a bad food system, and people, like to say the food system's broken, but it's not broken. It's just really, I mean, it works really well. It's just not. It's just bad. It's a bad food system, but it works. I mean, it's honed like a machine, which it basically is to produce the cheapest food and feed people in the easiest way. And, the old Romans say, give them bread and circuses, and basically you have television and fast food and
yeah, that's it.
Circuses right there. It's been perfected.